What happened to property prices in each capital city in 2024? We're about to find out. Let's go. In Sydney, house prices increased by 3.3% in 2024. Pretty good, nothing special, but just a pretty boring year for Sydney house prices. But it wasn't the same story all year. That 3.3% is actually dominated by January, February, March, and then from there, we didn't see all that much increase in house prices at all. In fact, house prices fell in the latter parts of the year. In October, November, and December, house prices have been falling in Sydney, and in total, it's come up with a 3.3% figure. Why has this happened? It's because there's been more sellers in the Sydney marketplace. What happened in Sydney over the past few years is in 2021, we had peak house prices, and then house prices fell a lot when interest rates began rising. And when they fell, everyone in Sydney's like, I don't want to sell my home. You can't buy my home right now because I'm not taking in that bargain basement price. But then the surprise of 2023 kicked in. Rental price inflation was through the roof. And that boosted up incomes and thereby boosted up house prices in 2023 and clawed all of it back. House prices got back to their 2021 level and hit a new peak, pretty much at their 2021 level, a little bit higher than that. And then you had all the Sydney-siders again being like, wait, hang on, you're going to pay me the same amount as you were when interest rates are 0.1%? When I had a 1.9% fixed rate, I can sell my property for the exact same price when interest rates are 6.5%, Sydney-siders are going like, yes, I'm out of here. That is exactly what has happened. You've had an increase in the total number of listings, particularly from property investors. Over-leveraged property investors, and there's a lot of them in Sydney, are looking at their Sydney property portfolios being like, I don't want this anymore, you have it. That's what's happening. I've even done that. I've sold off a Sydney property or two because its cash flow kind of sucked. I've achieved capital growth and the prices I was getting were pretty high. I was like, yeah, I'll take this. I don't want to own this so much. It's got negative cash flow and I could repurpose my money elsewhere. That's the common story of Sydney, and that's why house prices have begun falling. A lot of people have begun selling. You see it in total listing numbers too. Let's go to Melbourne next. A very similar story to Sydney, except it's just down 2.3%, depending on which numbers you use, between 2 and 5%. Melbourne house prices have moved backwards in 2024. Melbourne house prices have been moving backwards all year, pretty much. I can see negative growth rates pretty much across the year, a couple of positive ones, but we're in the middle of a housing correction, a pretty shallow housing correction in Melbourne. I don't know what it's correcting from because Melbourne house prices haven't really risen all that much for very long at all, and house prices are pretty close to their COVID levels 4 years ago in Melbourne today. But they are correcting a little bit. It is pretty weak out there in Melbourne, driven by a huge increase in listings, particularly in investor-dominated areas. We did some core logic research in another video recently where it showed this area called Sunbury in Victoria, in Melbourne, up nearly 90% in terms of listings. You've got so many investors getting out of there. SQM Research have done some distressed listing modeling as well. Like the investors that are selling are like, oh, can I actually pay my bills? Do I have enough money? Oh, I'm running out. I'm really feeling the pinch. That's some of the sellers out there in Melbourne. It offers you a good chance to negotiate pretty hard, and that's why you're seeing these growth rates. You're also seeing the rate that prices are falling, increasing. That means it's getting worse. It's going to keep getting worse before it gets better. That could potentially signal an opportunity. Now could be the time if you want to invest in Melbourne over the next couple of years. You want to get yourself a pretty good deal. You want to throw a couple lowball punches. You want to punch someone in the guts a little bit, metaphorically speaking. I know that sounds horrible, but you want to get a little bit of that discount and you want to be like, hey, property investor that's selling, I know you're in trouble. I know you're in trouble, but I'm not in trouble. Can I take your property off you at a discounted price? Sorry, Melbourneites. That's the story there at the moment, and that's what the data is suggesting. House prices moving backwards right now, 5.5% below their peak level all the way in March 2022. Pretty ugly story for Melbourne. If you go back through history, 50 years of Melbourne house price history, there's not too many periods where you look at a point in time 2 years after another point in time and be like, house prices are below their previous price level. House prices are more than 5% below their price level 2 years ago. And there's been a lot of inflation in the last 2 years. In Perth and Adelaide, house prices are up 50% in the last 2 years, while Melbourne down 5.5%. Anyway, let's get on to our next city. Brisbane. Brisbane is a shining light. It's doing so well, consistently well. Growth rates are coming back down, but the reason why is because Brisbane has done so well over the last few years, it's kind of run out of room to do well into the future. Affordability is really tight in Brisbane, and rental yields have started coming down so much, they're less than they are in Melbourne. It's overtaken Melbourne as the most expensive capital as well as the second most expensive capital, and house prices have risen 12%. 2%, 1.8% in the last quarter, and 0.6% in the last month. So very strong growth rates at the moment. Currently at record values, and it's gone through a pretty monster boom. And when interest rates began rising, there was that little slowdown that you saw in 2022 all across Australia where prices moved backwards, but it's more than clawed that up, and now it's gone full steam ahead, well and truly past it. So Brisbane has done very well in 2024, so well that it's got affordability constraints that are really tight at the moment. Rental yields really low. It's Sydney with really low rental yields, and then Brisbane. So if you buy an investment property in Brisbane today, you are going to experience seriously negative cash flow with these interest rates. Next up, we have Adelaide. Oh, what a story Adelaide is. 2024 is another year of Adelaide being like, yes, I am the champion. If it wasn't damn Perth trying to take my crown, but Adelaide has done so well. If you go through history, 2024 and 2022 and 2021, all of these years are going to be Adelaide being out here being like, we have done it. We have turned our economy around. We have turned house prices around, and Adelaide people are feeling wealthier. As a result, we're doing really well. But early signs suggest that the economy is starting to turn around. It has done very well last financial year, but some of that turnaround is actually happening where it was leading the national average, but now it's below the national average. And you could see that in the employment growth story in Adelaide too. Importantly, on the ground in 2024 as well, you're not having owner-occupiers fighting over properties anymore in Adelaide. You have investors dominating the story. And will investors continue that in 2025 when yields are so low today? And prices are so much higher. When prices go up 15%, less people want to buy in Adelaide. When yields are so low and you're getting seriously negative cash flow for investing in Adelaide, less people want to buy in Adelaide. So that story, will it continue in 2025? It's starting to approach a little bit of a tricky point too. Next up, we have Perth, the actual winner. Put your hands up, Perth, 21%. Hey, if you've bought in Perth, I want to know a little bit about your story. Drop a comment below about how you've bought in Perth, when you've bought in Perth, and what your property value has increased by this year. The data says 21%. Have you beaten that? I really want to know if that's the case from you, because that is pretty extraordinary. Look at this. House price growth rates are coming down in Perth, but it's coming off such a steep climb, 21% at the moment, up 3% this quarter and 1.1% in the month of November alone. So very good result in Perth. Perth has been absolutely smoking it over the last few years, doubling in prices effectively. You can almost say it now, doubling in prices. You will be able to say it in 2025, doubling in prices since COVID hit our shores. Wow, it's only been 4 or 5 years. Next up, we have Hobart. Hobart hasn't done well in 2024. Hasn't done well in 2023, hasn't done well in 2022. Oh, Hobart, if you've invested in Hobart in around there, you've probably been like, oops, made a mistake on that one. It did really well in 2018 and through the period all the way to 2021, but the Hobart price boom is over. The economy is moving backwards. Employment growth is moving backwards. House prices are moving backwards. And even in the month of November, house prices are moving backwards too. So not a very positive story. We are now 12.1% below its peak in March 2022 as well. So since March 2022, you've done pretty poorly, Hobart. Up next, we have Darwin, another city that has a little bit of a yo-yo through 2024, but doing quite poorly again in 2024. And this stat is amazing. Darwin dwelling values are now 7.4% below their record high, which was in May 2014. Darwin property prices are 7.4% below what they were 10 years ago. That is absolutely crazy. And yields are really, really high as well. So you have another year where Darwin house prices barely moved, up 1% for the year, 0.9%, but down over the recent quarter. So not doing very well again, but starting to become an attention, perhaps a warm spot for property investors in the months and years ahead. I think in 2025, we're going to have a very different Darwin story. You know, all those predictions over the last 5-10 years, I've seen it so many times. Darwin property prices will rise 10% this year. I think 2025 may be the year that finally happens. We'll talk more about that in a different video. Finally, we have Canberra here. Another year where not much happened, down 0.1%. There's not much change in house prices at all. Pretty weak market. But again, down 6.5% below their May 2022 peak. So one theme that I have through all of this state-by-state analysis is a huge divergence between different areas. You have one of the biggest divergences that you can see. Perth up 20%, Canberra, Darwin, Sydney, Melbourne, all these areas pretty much at zero on average, you know, up a little bit or down a little bit, haven't really done much. But Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth doing really, really well, driving up the national index. A very, very turbulent market. So as a property investor, the lesson I learned here is timing the market is actually pretty important. You don't want to be in some markets, particularly if it was May 2022, or in Darwin's case in 2014, you don't want to be in some markets at particular points in time, while other markets could do really, really well. So the lesson I have for property investors from this is if you're buying multiple property investments, or if you can buy multiple property investments, spread your eggs around. So if you have a year where one of your property investments has done nothing because it's in the wrong city, you're likely to have some level of return in your portfolio driven by a different city, and they're not correlated with all of each other, even though they're all in Australia. If you found this video interesting, if you found the 2024 market recap state by state, location by location interesting, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and join me on my journey to keep producing property content for you all.